All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for this Community Conversations, co-hosted by MTM-CNM Family Connection and Will Cure. My name is Mark Ward. I'm one of the co-founders and directors of MTM-CNM Family Connection. Also joining me is our president, Aaron Ward, and our vice president, Marie Wood. Our organization was founded back in 2014. With the mission to help connect families affected by myotubular and centronuclear myopathy, connect those families to each other, but also to research, other resources, and certainly the relationships that, especially in a rare disease community like ours, can be really meaningful. So that's a little bit about who we are. I'll ask Dan Whiston to give a quick introduction to himself and his organization.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who is attending from around the world. We're really excited to be a part of this conversation today and really excited to have a conversation with Dynacure. I know many people in the community. I see you all on this call, all of our friends, family, who are part of this wonderful MTM community could use a little bit more information. And I'm excited that Dynacure has agreed to update us on what's going on with them and tell us a little bit about who they are. I know not all of us have had an opportunity to learn as much as we would like about them, so I think this is a really great endeavor, and I'm really excited for the MTM-CNM Family Connection, Will Cure, and Dynacure to come together to put this on. Thank you, Mark, for taking the lead, and Christian, I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Great, thank you very much, Dan. It is wonderful to be able to collaborate across organizations and really across the world. So with that, I will move to introducing Dynacure and our speaker. For those of you who attended the MTM-CNM Family Conference in 2019, you would have had a chance to meet and hear Chris Freitag. He is the Chief Medical Officer for Dynacure. He's responsible for the medical development and regulatory with their lead program. Dynacure was actually formed, I believe, back in 2016 as an offshoot of research that really mostly came out of IDMC in Strasbourg, France. So it's some amazing technology, and we're very excited to hear about this. So with that, let me stop sharing this screen. I'm going to shift over to, and I will ask Chris to take over and unmute himself and take the presentation from here.
All right. Thanks very much, Mike. So I'd like to start with a big thank you, actually to all patient organizations for working with us and for allowing us to be close to you. And in this case, very specifically to the MTM Family Connection and to Will Cure for organizing this call, giving me the opportunity to update you all directly and giving everyone on the call the opportunity to ask some questions. As Mark has said, that's something we will be doing shortly. The presentation, I honestly am not really sure how long it's going to take. I will try to elaborate on the relevant parts and skip through the more routine things a little bit. Let's see how that goes. Don't worry if you feel like I've gone a little too fast on something, because the question time afterwards will certainly allow us to go back, look at a slide again, or just take a question. So that should all be fine. So thank you for the introduction as well, Mark. I'm Chris Freitag, Chief Medical Officer. I've also seen so far on the call, I think from Dynacure, Belinda, Lane, and Stefan, who will come to in a little while. And Laurie, one of our newer colleagues, is also on the call. Thanks, Laurie. So I hope this worked, to the next slide. I hope. Yes, excellent. So we like to thank you. We like to start all of our presentations, I think really can say that throughout the board, throughout all of our presentations that we do, whether it's internal or external, we love to have a slide of our patients, potential patients who we can hopefully help in these slides. And this is a short or very small part of our pool of patients, and some have become friends over time. There's one young man on the right you might recognize from the US. The other three are European families, but I believe we also have families from Europe on the call, so you may recognize yourselves. Won't go into names and details here, but thank you also for allowing us to show your photos and for us to work with you in this way. And maybe Laurie can say a little bit more about that later on as we proceed through the presentation. So if we, here we go, there. I would, with that, like to introduce Laurie. It's a great pleasure. Laurie has significant experience in advocacy and working with patient organizations, understanding patient communities, and has been in biotech for over 20 years. We're very happy to have Laurie, who's based in the US, on our team. But I think I should hand over to her briefly so that she can talk about herself better than I can. So please, Laurie.
Sure. Hi everyone. Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much for having me. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be part of this meeting today. I'm the newest extension of the Dynacure team, and I'm based in the Boston area. I've spent about 20 years working in rare diseases, as Christian said, primarily with the background in both communications, but also patient advocacy. And I think I probably learned the most about the journeys of patients with rare diseases during my time at Genzyme. And I think, like all of us, we're constantly in learning and listening mode. So for my first project at Dynacure, I hope to reach out to many of you and to start developing case studies about some of the journeys of patients within the United States in an effort to help to raise awareness, but also to help really just to continue to complete our understanding of your journeys and what your days look like. So my contact information is on the slide, and I think Chris and I will be reaching out to many of you over the next couple of weeks to further my introduction to you. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Laura. So these are the other members of the team, or some of the other members of our team. We're nearly all there. We're a small group. We're based with headquarters in Strasbourg in France by the IDMC, as Mark has already mentioned. And we're a small group of dedicated professionals who have done a lot of work in what we call the preclinical phase, so before patients are treated. And Belinda has led most, if not all of that, who's on the call as well and can thankfully step in and take some questions that go in that direction. And we are building up more and more into doing clinical trials and working with patients. That's one of the reasons why I'm on board. So this is the team. We're small enough to be really engaged and personal, and so we hope to be able to answer questions not just on this call but in general quite directly and have a good dialogue with you. Go to the next. I think I can. Oh, no, it requires a little bit of a click every time. There we go. So I'll go walk you quickly through what we are doing in terms of clinical work. What does clinical work mean? When we talk about clinical development, that really means treating patients, potential patients, people who are affected by the disease. There's an opportunity during this so-called clinical phase to also treat healthy volunteers. So if you want to just get some numbers on how the drug is changed in the body, etc., then sometimes work can be done in healthy volunteers. That's also part of clinical, but that's not what we are doing. We are, as a first entry, the first use of this potential medicine in patients is going to happen directly in patients. We're not trying it first in healthy volunteers. But we are collecting data on what the disease that we are investigating, or whether we are hoping to treat, what that actually does in its natural course. There's a lot of you probably are familiar with natural history studies. I know that a lot of people on the call are actually participating in this natural history study, but they are really, really important to us. There is a few years ago, there was just some information scattered about individual cases, and we need, in order to make sure that we are on the right track with our development of this medicine, that we really understand fully how the drug shows itself in different people differently, at different ages differently possibly, and with different severity. In order to understand that, we have this natural history study that is ongoing. We have 60 subjects enrolled in the study, both with the X-linked and the Dynamin 2 mutation. And we aim for a study duration of 3 years. That's pretty approximate. We have some patients who are coming up for 4 years now, and others have more recently started and have been part of the study for maybe 18 months, 12 months. But it's supposed to offer us data of, on average, 3 years of observation. The sponsor for the study, which is an important concept in pharmaceutical, in law, but the sponsor is the Institute of Myology in France, and Dr. Laurent Servet, whom some of you may know by name or even have met. He's a very interesting guy to talk to. He's no longer in Paris, he's now in Oxford and in Liège in Belgium, but he's the lead investigator and remains the lead investigator for this study. And we're getting a lot of good information out of the study that will inform how we need to conduct our clinical work to make sure that we get really relevant results. If we move to the next, there we go, that's working. So this is our first study that we are conducting. This is a diagram. This looks a little busy, could be a little confusing, so I'll try and talk everyone through what we're doing as our first study. So we want to, the light blue box in the middle is really the heart of the study. It's called phase 1/2. We're kind of doing two things at the same time. We're understanding how the drug is metabolized, so how it is changed and excreted in the body, understanding the chemistry, the biochemistry of the drug, and we really want to get our dosing right. So we're looking at how well the drug is tolerated. Safety is a hugely important issue. I don't need to stress that. So this is primarily a safety study to help us find the correct dose, understand pharmacokinetics, and find the right dose for patients. And this is we have, the abbreviations are a bit unfortunate, SAD and MAD. SAD is single ascending dose. So the patients are administered one dose, and then we stop, wait and see, take a whole lot of blood samples, unfortunately. But we need to do this to really understand what the drug does in the body. And then we go to multiple dosing, which is where we could expect to see some signs of efficacy. From a single dose, honestly, we at the moment do not expect to see signs of efficacy. We believe that more continual dosing is required. So we have the 12 weeks of multiple dosing followed by a further 12 weeks afterwards. And that was a little bit contentious, so I'll explain that a little further. When we say n equals 18, that means 18 patients come into the study in total. That's 9 patients with the MTM-1 mutation and 9 patients with Dynamin 2. We are including patients who have participated in the natural history study. Those are the boxes to the left, but also it's not an absolute requirement. So patients who have not participated in the natural history study may enter through a run-in. So we get to know very thoroughly the status of the disease in this particular patient, because it is so variable. You know this yourselves, you know this best from your meetings, how some patients are more severely affected earlier than others. So we really need to understand that before patients enter the dosing phase. The extension study, I said I would come back to that. Why are we doing an extension of 12 weeks? Well, we believe that an additional 12 weeks will be really important in case the onset of effect with this treatment is slow and gradual, that an additional 12 weeks might increase the chance of us showing, being able to show efficacy and being able to understand time to onset when maybe we're assuming, of course, that this drug will be efficacious, right? So, but which parts which aspects of the disease may improve before others? We don't expect it to be like flicking a switch, that everything improves at once and the light goes on, so to speak, but that it will be a more gradual process. We need to understand that really well. So overall, 24 weeks, which is quite a long time of continuous dosing during the course of the study. This study is conducted in Europe, and the patients are over 16 or 16 and over. In some areas, like in Germany, for instance, the patients can only really consent to treatment, to participation in a study from 18. So basically all the participants from Germany, for instance, have to be 18 and older. And in other parts of Europe, 16-year-olds may already consent, so patients from the age of 16 may already participate. When we look at efficacy, what are we looking? We've listened to you. We've been, as you know, to meetings, have joined patient organization meetings, and have really wanted to understand well what is relevant to you, what affects your daily life, and what has come out, and also what can we? It's one thing how lives are affected. It's another thing whether we can measure that. Can we measure it reliably? Does a system exist for this kind of assessment? Can it be done systematically? Can we transfer it? Can we do the measurement in different places on the planet and get consistent results? So these are all things that we have to consider. And we've come up with these 5 domains, I'm really sorry, with 8 different assessments. So one is a grip strength test, which is pretty squeezing. It's a simple squeezing test. Anybody participating in the natural history study will know it. Then there's a more elaborate assessment that is usually done by physiotherapists, the MFM32 muscle function scale, who ask questions about eating and swallowing. As you all know, that's affected from swallowing own saliva down to or all the way to being able to eat, chew solids, etc. It's important how severely patients are affected by the disease, or how severely the disease affects the patients. We understand also respiratory function. It's a big threat. Pneumonias are not uncommon, unfortunately. And then the last area that we look at, it's listed last, but I think is really quite important, is quality of life is one thing. It's the patient-reported outcomes. It's basically what you as patients and carers tell us. There's a carer questionnaire in there. And we are looking to do a goal attainment score, which means that we ask you as patients, or ask you as family of patients, and in this case it is directly a dialogue.
Looks like we have a pause in our connection here.
And physician to tell, I'm sorry.
Sorry for that, Chris. We just had a brief pause in your connection, so continue. Thank you.
Am I back now? Oops, sorry. Yeah. So, yes, we ask the patient what is relevant to him or her, and hope that we can, and in the end we ask how much closer, did you get any closer to this goal? If so, how much, etc. So this is a really interesting exercise for us also to understand what are important goals for patients, not just what we can measure, but what you tell us you would like to have improved. And then following, it's called phase 1/2, although it sounds like we're doing 2 things at once. And it's true that we are. Phase 1 is all the safety, gathering all the bloods, seeing what happens with the drug in the patient's body. Phase 2 is looking at this early look at efficacy already. So we are looking at those 2 things. That's why it's phase 1/2. This study needs to show that the drug that we're developing, the AntiSense Oligonucleotide that we're developing, reaches the muscle in significant amounts so that we can expect an effect and that it has an effect in that. If we can demonstrate all of that, we would like to initiate a registration-directed program in Europe and the US, so to include US. Now, what does registration-directed program mean? It means that we want to get approval for the drug to be able to be sold and used freely by treatment by physicians. So basically a license to sell the product and market the product across the world, including US and Europe. So the next study after the one that we are currently, that you see on the slide, we want that to include both US and European sites. One of the things that we need to have in order to be able to do that is approval by the Food and Drug Administration. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with what that means. That means we go through a process of dialogue with the FDA, with the US FDA, for them to get agreement on what that development program will look like. We have started that dialogue, and so far it is looking good. We can progress, but it is still a dialogue that we have to complete successfully before we can start a US program. So I'll go to the next. So this is where the sites are. To add a little color to my otherwise black and white presentation, these are the countries in which we have sites: Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Netherlands, and UK. All sites have green ticks. In Denmark, we are still waiting. Danish law says we need to have an inspection. The site needs to be inspected before a study can take place, and that inspection has to be done in person, physically in person, present at the sites. And all of you know, I'm sure, about the COVID-19 disaster, I dare say, that has hit us over the last few months, and that has prevented this inspection from taking place, which as a knock-on then has meant that we are not ready to start in Copenhagen yet, but other sites have got approval, and we are largely across Europe pretty much ready to go. We have had, just before COVID broke out, we were able to treat one patient at the Belgian site. Dr. Baats has treated one patient with a single dose. I explained to you the single dose is the starting point, and then we move on to multiple dose. So this patient has received a single dose, but not entered the multiple dose phase yet, which in a way is unfortunate, because that would have really, starting before COVID, and then that COVID would have caused a huge break in the treatment, and we would have been a really challenging thing to deal with. This was difficult enough without having to interrupt planned treatment. So these are the sites. This is where we are in Europe. Go to the next slide. And these other patients, you can see there, BE is Belgium and L is Netherlands. Those are the two sites that were originally really all set up and ready to go to start the treatment of patients. And this is a graphic that we take to describe progress in the clinical trial. Cohort 1 is a low dose cohort, cohort 2 is the middle dose cohort, and cohort 3 is high dose. At the moment, we can honestly, hand on heart, not say that one cohort, being in one cohort, has an advantage over the other. Safety is a really important factor. Being on a lower dose treatment for a long time may also be meaningful. It doesn't mean that being the only really relevant dose group to be in is the highest dose. That's simply not correct. And we need to go through a gradual, safe increase of dose. All patients who enroll in this study, once we have the appropriate best dose that is well tolerated and shows effect, that has that balance right, all patients will be put on that dose quite naturally. And to help us with that and make sure that we are doing the right thing, we have these so-called IDMC meetings there, and they're in yellow, different shades of yellow and ochre. IDMC 1, 2, 3, 4. IDMC is Independent Data Monitoring Committee. This is a group of experts who have a statistician at their disposal, who look at all of the data that we've generated. They have access to all data that comes out of this clinical trial. They analyze it, and they are expert physicians on the disease and on different pathologies. So they pass judgment on whether it is safe to move to the next dose level or not. So we have this committee, and they look at this very carefully. Their eye is quite important. They're independent of us. In some regions, we're not even actually allowed to pay, because that could be interpreted as bribery. So we're not even, some of these members, we're not allowed to pay and are not paying. They are thankfully giving us their time, and we're grateful for that, just to help us conduct this study as safely as possible and to come to the right dose. So that, I think, is all from this slide. This just goes to show to you that we are closely monitoring the progress, and can, of course, give updates. Reasonably, if we need summaries like this, we should be in a position to give good summaries at almost any given time as to how we are doing with our program. I think this is where I finish. Just to say thank you. These are the patient organizations that we support, and we'll be working more. Laurie has already indicated that she'll be reaching out, and we'll be working together with Laurie to maybe intensify and improve overall our understanding of how we can work together to everyone's benefit, really. That's our objective. But I know that you have a lot of questions. I think there were some that I've already had access to, in which you ask about when we go to the US. I hope that's become a little clearer. There were questions about adult participation and children participation. So there's maybe one little thing I can say before we open to questions. We had to start, and I've just seen a question popping up, Y16. We had to, based on feedback that we got from regulatory authorities, centronuclear myopathies occur in adults and in children. And therefore, as you know, of course, you don't need me to tell you that. So because there are potentially adult patients that we can treat, from a safety point of view, and our drug should be efficacious, according to everything that we've done so far and all the work that Belinda has done, should be efficacious in adults as well as children. The tolerance in terms of safety of drug administration is generally larger in adults than it is in children. Children tend to be a bit more, let's use the word fragile in that sense. So we have an obligation to test in the most robust, stable population first, and then go into maybe more sensitive population of children. So we were obliged to start our journey in developing this medicine in adults. So that's what we are doing now. There is a question also that you have asked about women participating. When can adult women participate is a question. So now, fundamentally, we are including MTM1 carrier ladies in the trial in Europe. It's open to MTM1. And of course, Dynamine-2 female patients of age 16 and older participate as well, of course, in the European study. Our next study, we really want that to be in children, and that should be in both Europe and the US. I'm trying to think. I think best maybe to open it up to questions. I think, Mark, you've already compiled some
Sure.
to start us off. So I'll hand over. You've taken control back, I believe.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you. And we will shift to questions for the next 20, 25 minutes or so. I see some people are starting to put them in the chat. That's great. You can continue to do that. I do want to ask just maybe to back up a little bit for Chris or maybe Belinda to comment just generally the nature of Dynamine 101 or Dyne 101 and kind of what is the medicine, what does it entail, how does it work at a very, very basic level.
I would love to give that to Belinda if she's still online, otherwise.
Yeah, Chris, can you hear me?
I can hear you all right. Yeah, I don't think
everyone else too?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. I don't think we have any slides prepared, but basically, from a simple level, what we think is happening is that Dynamine-2 in the muscle cells of centronuclear myopathy patients becomes overexpressed or overactive. So we think that it becomes hyperactive or overexpressed, and we think that that becomes toxic to the muscle cells. And so what we're trying to do, regardless of the genetic mutation, what we're trying to do is use one antisense that can target that dynamin 2 and reduce the total pool of dynamin 2 to try and have a therapeutic effect. So we've shown that that works in animal models with different forms of centronuclear myopathies. And what we want to see now is if the same mechanism holds true in patients. Is that clear enough, Mark?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's good for now. If people are interested in digging deeper, maybe they can follow up with other questions. But that leads me to a question that I think Chris sort of touched on, is that as we know, there are different forms of centronuclear myopathy, different genetic causes that have similar features on muscle biopsy and some similar clinical features. Can you maybe comment on what you expect the applicability of this to be towards any particular genetic diagnosis?
So across, we expect to be able to demonstrate efficacy following the mode of action that Belinda has just outlined on the dynamin 2, all of the dynamin 2 mutations, all of the MTM1 and BIN1. Titin, I believe not, but I have to refer to Belinda again.
No, you're right, Chris. So we've shown in preclinical models that reducing dynamin 2 is effective in the mice in the X-linked form, so myotubular myopathy, in the BIN1 related form, and the dynamin 2 related form. We don't have evidence yet suggesting that it's therapeutic in either Titin or RYR1 or other genetic causes of centronuclear myopathies.
Great, thank you. A question here that I think you touched on, but worth expanding. Again, given the nature of the AntiSense Oligonucleotide type medicine, also called ASO, which some people might not be as familiar with, can you just explain the expectation of treatment? This is not a one-time treatment, right? This is a continuous, maybe explain a little bit about how you foresee that being applied.
Sure. So this is something we're very keen to get more detail on. For the moment, it's a clear statement. We're the drug or the product ASO is to be administered weekly intravenous injection, and that is based on ensuring that the concentrations of the drug are high enough that they penetrate into the muscle and can take effect there. We're being cautious and dosing, I think, really quite frequently in order to ensure that we have kind of the optimal exposure. We have some indications, again, in animal model, and as we all know, we cannot transfer directly or translate directly information blindly from animal to human. This doesn't work, but we know that there are some indicators in the animal work that show that maybe dosing does not need to be as frequently as weekly. And this is something we definitely want to look at and to explore, but at the moment it's a weekly injection into the vein. We decided not to attempt the injection under the skin. There have been in the past some reactions that happen under the skin that cause some scarring that we decided for the initial part of the program we can avoid. If that becomes an opportunity later on for us to look at, it might be easier to administer the drug under the skin in an quick injection under the skin, like a vaccination rather than through the vein. But that's something that we're really leaving for later. We want to make sure that it gets to where it needs to get to, and that means into the vein injection.
All right, thank you. You did outline the European sort of clinical trial sites that are planned at the moment. I know we have quite a few US families here on this call. So I was wondering if you could maybe expand a little bit on the general theme of the question is, when can we become involved directly? If you can share any more about the timeline, specifically for the US in terms of when clinical sites would be available for US participation.
Yeah, so there are two challenges always with this question. One is, I believe there's some sort of law like Murphy's Law, say, that dictates that whichever timeline I give you will end up being wrong. And the other thing is that we have the additional difficulty with the COVID pandemic at the moment. That really is difficult to predict. When are we going to be able to go to normal, whatever that means, but activity. So it's hard to say. At the moment in our books, officially we're looking at the end of 2021, early 2022. It also depends on the strength of the findings and the what we see in our first trial. So I do not want to overpromise here. I think it's a disaster if people hold their breath and expect us to be quick with something, and then we get a second or third wave or whatever it may happen now, or recruitment goes a little slower. You see, this is the other thing for our UNITE-CNM trial. For the European study, we had recruitment exactly mapped out, and we knew which patients at which site, how it was going to roll. It was a I don't know, I guess quite finely honed how we were going to organize ourselves, and that's all been thrown up in the air again. So it's very difficult, but I can give you that rough timeline, 21, 22. It's at that cusp between 21 and 22. And that's looking early, looking at data as soon as we need information and have analyzed muscle biopsies from the European study before we even have a justification to start treating children. And before we can start, this is information we need to discuss with the US FDA as well, that we need a basis, solid scientific basis to start treating children.
All right, thank you. I know you so far clinically only were able to dose one patient a single time, and the nature of the phase 1 study is particularly to look at safety of the treatment. So obviously there's not a lot of data yet, but what safety signals are you anticipating or paying close attention to? What safety concerns might you be watching out for with a treatment like this?
Great, that's a really good question. So we the first thing I can say is that that the patient who has been treated appears to have tolerated this dose, the single dose, quite well. Does not reported any negative effects from there, which is nice. I mean, it's not this is one low dose, etc., but it's still a good bit of news, I would say. What are we looking out for? There's a long answer which I will give you, or longish, and then there's the short one. I'll start off with the short one. The short one is we look out for everything, which is a bit kind of a dull thing to say, but it's true that this mechanism is being tried for the first time, as Belinda has outlined, this reduction of the dynamin 2 protein. And dynamin 2 is present in many different organs and different parts of the body. So we really are keeping an eye on everything. This is why anybody participating in the study has a fair few blood tests done, has investigations, lung function tests, all sorts of things done to observe and make sure, liver ultrasounds before treatment some patients will have to have, etc. Because we want to really cast a wide net to catch what we can on safety. Now there's a more detailed answer to that, because that's the kind of thing that you would expect someone to say when they're testing a new drug. We look at everything, okay. But specifically, we know from this group of medicines, from the ASOs, we know that they get excreted from the body. The body gets rid of these enzymes in the liver and in the kidney. So one thing we're making sure we have a close eye on are the functions of both liver and kidney. As one of the inclusion, we have to be very, very cautious with letting patients who've had an issue in the past with liver. We really make sure that there's nothing remaining now, issues with kidney in the past. We really make sure at screening for the study that we understand completely what went on if the patient is to be included. And then we monitor these effects very closely. So that's the one thing. The other thing we know is that this class of drug reduces platelets. Now, people much cleverer than me can give you a long explanation as to why that is. Suffice it to say that these platelet drops can take different forms. Sometimes they can drop quite suddenly, sometimes they drop slowly. Platelets are the little bodies that circulate in the blood that help your blood clot. So in addition to checking this platelet count every time a drug is administered, we also are asking patients to look out for certain signs. If they start bruising or show any sign that they might be bleeding, we look out for that also. So those are the focus points, but and we're looking for inflammation, markers of inflammation, a reaction to this compound that is being injected. Sometimes you can expect it's like an immune reaction, right? Your body reacts to this protein, this foreign thing that is injected, and we look out for those inflammation reactions as well. But we know from other drugs of the same class that is generally quite well tolerated, certainly the doses that we are using. So that is a little less of a concern, but we're looking for that also. So I hope that's a thorough answer to your question.
Yeah, great. And sort of given the nature of the type of drug and what you understand from preclinical trials and how the body is expected to process this, if there was some sort of clinical adverse events or negative side effects, would ceasing the treatment, in other words, not giving further doses, would that expect to resolve issues quickly, or is that still an unknown? Would there be lingering effects if they occur?
The short answer is yes, they should resolve. This is one of the advantages of this type of treatment over single shot treatments, which are single administration. That is that the drug we know gets eliminated and the effect wears off if it is not regularly maintained. The truth of it, though, is that if an effect is severe and immediate and has a heavy onset and sudden onset, this can occur, and recovery, just stopping the drug may not be enough, and it may require additional treatment, which, for instance, platelets, if the platelets drop a lot, it may not drop, just stopping the drug might not be sufficient. May, for instance, have to transfuse platelets to compensate. Or other drugs maybe have to be administered to ameliorate the effects. But in general, I would say that one of the measures that we take in response to a serious adverse event would be stopping the drug administration and seeing hopefully the recovery from that. There's never a 100% guarantee for that, but it's definitely an option in this treatment, yes.
All right, thank you. Just check my list of questions here. Again, if people do have other questions that are coming up, don't forget to use the chat.
There's one, what is required for successful treatment to become commercially viable? I see that question. Do you mind if I go to that one, Mark? That's
a great segue. Just, I know that timelines are very difficult to say, especially at this time. I mean, at any time in drug development, but especially these days. But maybe if you could kind of outline what are the main stages or requirements to ultimately get you know, a drug approved and available on the market?
Yes. So first we need the scientific research work that Belinda has done to a fantastically high standard already. Then we need to start with treating patients. Like I said, sometimes there can be in patients who are unaffected by the disease to start with, just to test some safety parameters. That's deliberately not been done with our drug, and we go straight into the treatment of adult patients. What does it take to register a successful treatment? So we need to demonstrate safety and efficacy. And here's the idea. Even if, for instance, we show quite good efficacy in a short space of time, let's say in 3 months, you show that efficacy is already visible in 3 months, and we show this in 3 patients or 4, for argument's sake. You could say, well, there you go, right? It works. Not quite so. What is required is a demonstration. The idea for us is that this product should be administered. It should be made available to patients for a prolonged period of time. This is not something that we expect a 4-week course and then everything is good. It will have to be continued to be administered. And for that, authorities like the Food and Drug Administration require long-term safety data. That means administration of the drug for at least a year with acceptable safety profile. The drug is administered for in a significant number of patients, and this is why it's so challenging in rare disease to do these studies, because we need to have. And what is a sufficient number of patients? It could maybe 20 or 30 patients, but certainly not 4 or 5. That we have to. There's a number of patients that we have to demonstrate that the drug can be safely administered, and side effects like, for instance, the platelets, that we demonstrate we can control them by pausing treatment, etc. So we need to show both safety and efficacy, and an ideal regimen. So we should, when we go and discuss with FDA the commercial viability, as is phrased in the question here, of our product, it will also include looking at the right dosing schedule. How often does it really need to be administered? How often is it safe to administer the drug, and at which dose? And then what is the magnitude of the impact that this drug has on patients? And that is something that sometimes we rely also on groups like yourselves to support us in saying this may be somewhat unusual, difficult to understand, but this difference is impactful for patients. It makes a difference in patients' lives to do this. This is not something you can easily register on a scale. You can't compute it easily, but it has a positive impact. And sometimes in order for a treatment to be accepted, patient organizations have played a role in that. And I can see Laurie looking up, so I think she's familiar with that. Very familiar with that concept, where patient organizations like yours have said, yes, it may not be as easy to measure as some other endpoints, like when you're treating high blood pressure or you're treating a heart attack. It's a softer measurement. It's not quite as easily reproducible all the time, but it is impactful for patients. That kind of support from patients can actually help with regulatory bodies too. So just to put that little pitch in there, it might happen that we continue this dialogue and we go down that road. And
great, yeah, and we're really happy to have establish this dialogue with you, and as well as with other organizations, and we look forward to continuing that. I just want to clarify in terms of the phase 1-2 studies that you referred to, and kind of the aim of registration, and to connect that to what you were just talking about. In terms of getting the full longer-term efficacy and safety information. Is that additional data collection part of the phase 1 and 2 that you outlined, or is there additional trial design to be determined?
There's definitely additional trial designs. So the program that is due in our planning at the moment to take place, the second study that I was referring to, the one that takes place in US and Europe, that is the one that we believe will be so-called pivotal, will be the one that we can submit the data for registration, that we are discussing with the FDA. This is the study that we presented to FDA a few weeks ago as a proposal to how we can reach that point where it's acceptable for FDA for us. Number one, to conduct the study, and number two, then afterwards to use the data to get approval. So this study that we're doing now, UNITE-CNM, the slide, a few slides back there that I talked you through, that one is not sufficient for registration, we believe. This is really a first foray into treating patients. And we need that other data. So I believe the time to market, maybe Lane, are you able to unmute yourself, or Stefan? Do we have a date for, at the moment, when we believe we will go to market?
Because this is very difficult to predict. Very sorry for the audience to say that, as you know, clinical development, it takes a long time, and we must make sure that we do it right. That's very important, that we do it right and that we have a safe treatment or no treatment, right? If there are no results, there will be no treatment. So we need to test it, and we need to do it right. And normally you do start with the phase 1-2, and then afterwards you have a pivotal trial, right? And then your question might be, how does a pivotal trial looks like, and what are the timelines for the pivotal trial in order to come to market? well, that depends also on the results of the phase 1/2. You see, so it's a bit chicken and the egg. We start learning now through this trial how the compound behaves, how the safety looks like, and hopefully how efficacy looks like. And based on that, Chris and his team will develop the pivotal trials next to that. And hopefully, by engaging with FDA and the EMEA in Europe, so the FDA in the US, we call it EMA in Europe, we will find a way to bring the drug as soon as possible to market. Believe me, that's really our mission. Hope it helps.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you. We're coming close to the end of the hour, so we're going to start to wrap up. If anybody does have any last minute questions, please get them in. Stefan or Laurie or Belinda as well, if you have any additional thoughts or comments, feel free to join.
Laurie, can you give a flavor to one of your projects that maybe makes sense?
One of the projects with Dynacure, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, well, as Chris was saying, the voice of the patient is going to be so critical here. You are the experts on this disease far more than most physicians and certainly FDA. And so your voice and your feedback about what success looks like for any potential treatment and how your quality of life is affected by this disease and what kind of measurements that you're looking for are crucially important. I think it's also important for FDA and other external audiences to truly understand the burden of this disease. And I think, you know, when we tell your stories, it's not going to be the most positive, optimistic, you know, I want to have an air of seriousness and a tone to really communicate how important it is to have more focus on this disease and more efforts to advance treatments forward. So I'm hoping that you'll trust me with your stories and that we can have some honest conversations about what your day-to-day life is really like and what you're hoping a treatment could do for you in the future.
Great, thank you, Laurie. And would you maybe comment on what's the best way to stay in touch with you?
So I shared my contact information, and a couple of you have already reached out, which I think is great. But I'll work with Chris in the next week or so to really, you know, I want to respect the role of patient organizations and make sure that you patient leaders are first aware of how I might be interacting with members of the community. So I share my contact information, but look for communication coming from Chris and me in the next week or so as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Mark, may I have just another half a minute?
Yes.
Just real quick, Zach, I think you just asked a question on chat. Maybe it was just to me. But I see that you're asking about a contingency plan to continue dosing for a second wave. It's really, really difficult. So one thing we've noticed, or that we've encountered in Europe so far, is that even with the best will in the world from us at Dynacure, from the investigator, even from the patient saying, I'd like to come in, I want to move this along, come on. Hospitals have simply closed the doors. And that makes sense. They do that to protect their staff, to protect the other patients and patients like yourselves, really, who are very vulnerable if you should get infected with the COVID virus. So it is to a degree out of our hands. Contingency planning as such is really quite a difficult thing, because we rely on the cooperation. Given that this is the first time the drug is tried in patients, in humans, we have to really monitor the safety very closely. That means it's a challenge for us. We cannot, for instance, say, okay, we move the administration to your home. That would be one of those things that you could imagine, right? Why not have a team that comes in and administers the drug at home? But we really need to have all precautions in place, safety measures, and this is something that is covered under the big umbrella of what is called good clinical practice. We have a real obligation to keep everyone safe. So a second wave of COVID could slow us down again. unfortunately. And we would, while we have very good investigators who've, thankfully, due to the fact they've been through it once, they know what to anticipate, and they can maybe put certain measures in place to try and keep studies going for as long as possible. There's not a contingency plan as such that we could push through against a hospital, for instance, if they wanted it. That's just to respond to your question. I didn't want to ignore that. There's also questions that come in about participation from other parts of the world, not just US and Europe, or certain countries in Europe. The countries in which we are at the moment in Europe, that doesn't cover all of Europe, of course. So we get lots of inquiries about that, inquiries from Israel, from New Zealand, from Australia, from South Africa. And this is really, these are very difficult emails for me to answer, because we have a limitation as to how many patients we are even allowed to include in trials. We have budgets according to which we need to run. I can't open one site in New Zealand because I would really like to, no matter how much I would like to. It just, I have to stick within a framework that is given to us. So as much as I would like to, I can't say that we can do that easily. Sorry about that.
All right. Well, thank you very much for all the questions and all the answers. I know, especially with a program of this nature, it's some of the answers that we hope to hear are just not able to be given at this time, just because nobody knows, and that's part of the nature of drug development, especially in a rare disease like this. But we thank you very much, Chris and Stefan and Melinda and Laurie and Dynacure team for your work. And the hope that this brings, as well as being realistic and transparent with what the expectations are for the future. This is not easy to do for anybody in the best of times, and especially in the COVID era, extra challenging. So again, we thank you for your work. Thank you for the presentation today very much. And we appreciate your time. So we're going to wrap up here. Again, I'm really grateful for the opportunity and for everybody that was able to join. Every other summer we do host a conference in person here in the United States, and that's a great time to connect. This was not going to be a summer for that anyway. It would be next summer, but especially with the COVID era, we're glad we're able to connect online virtually here. So we'll look to continue to do this. So I just want to say, again, thank you to Chris and our presenters. Before we go, I want to hand off to Dan Whiston for a quick preview of what's coming up next here. Dan is still on?
I'm here.
All right.
We had a power outage here, so my apologies for losing you for a few minutes. Yes, we're pleased to announce that we'll have another community conversation with Dr. Jim Dowling, who will be presenting on the repurposing of tamoxifen and work in that area. That's scheduled for Monday, July 13th. I won't list the times because everybody's in different time zones. I don't want to confuse everybody, but we're excited to have him give a similar presentation as to the status of his work and potential clinical trials for repurposing of tamoxifen.
Great. Yeah, we're very excited about that work as well. And again, looking to connect with you all in a similar format as we did today. So look for that to be posted on our Facebook groups, our web pages, Twitter, all your favorite feeds, etc. So with that, again, thank you very much to everybody for participating. We're going to go ahead and close the call here. Have a great day.
Thank you very much for having us.